I always tell foundations, you are the chief problem lovers in the field. We talk about how do you stop loving the problem. They love problems. Tell me how broken it is. Give me the percentages. Why you instead of somebody else. But for nonprofits, tell them the story of what's being built. And foundations are learning how to ask. They're learning how to create spaces where grantees can radically imagine, but they're not all there yet. So you have to show them the way by creating a picture of what the future could look like.
Hey everyone, it's Hildy, and this is the Creating the Future podcast. I'm really so glad you're here. This is a place for us to explore what really creates social change. Beyond the assumption that change is slow and incremental, what creates the kind of dramatic change that we can see and feel? That's the question driving this podcast. What actually creates change? What will create the healthy, joyful future we all want to live in? I could not imagine kicking off this podcast with anyone but Trista Harris. Trista is the author of the book FutureGood. She's a consultant and an advocate for future-focused leadership in the social change arena. Trista calls herself a philanthropic futurist, but I think you'll find her outlook towards the future moves far beyond philanthropy. Mostly, Trista is absolutely energizing. She makes it so practical for all of us to create the future we want for our world. I can't think of anyone better to kick off the first episode of the Creating the Future podcast. It is such a pleasure to have you with us today, Trista. I am just so glad. I've been looking forward to this conversation so much. Thank you for being here.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here, and I'm glad we could finally connect.
I know, me as well. Before we get diving into everything, could you just tell a little bit about what is it that has led you to the work that you're doing right now? What is that path that has gotten you to the work that you're doing right now?
So I've worked in nonprofits and foundations since I was 15 years old. I knew when I was 8 that I wanted to work in the social sector, so this has always been the path. But I had my first position running a social justice foundation. I was 29 years old, super excited. And a couple months into the job, we got a call it was a community foundation that fundraised. We got a call from our investment advisor, and he said, "Don't panic," which is a perfect time to panic. Our endowment had lost 50% of its value overnight. This was in 2008 when the stock market collapsed.
Right.
We tried to be a good funder that made multi-year grants, which means that we just did not have dollars to give away. And I was positive we were going to shut down. And I had zero strategies besides crushing anxiety.
Always a good first go-to.
Fetal position under your desk is really my go-to, and that was not working. I ran into a book about how to use futurism to get a business advantage during times of crisis. And I read it from front to back, and I was like, this is a crisis. And I realized that we could bring those tools to our grantees. And so I brought futurism tools to our grantees, and in the next couple of years, they had 10 legislative wins, the most in our organization's history. Things like first in its country homeowners' bill of rights to deal with the mortgage foreclosure crisis,
Sure.
Alternative teacher certification to diversify our state's teaching force, and marriage equity in the state of Minnesota. And so it lit this spark in me that if you put the tools of futurism in the hands of people that do good for a living, they really can make a more beautiful future.
That's inspiring. I love that it came from a book at the right time.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah,
Sometimes the thing lands in your hand and it's exactly what you need to move forward.
I think when we're open for it, and sometimes in those times of crisis, there's like two modes. We either completely shut down,
Yes.
or we're open to whatever we can find out there.
Give me some help.
Yeah, exactly. What a gift.
Love it.
Well, that leads directly into the question that's at the center of this podcast, which is when you see change happening out in the world, what do you see are the factors that actually support that change? What leads to change?
I think that change happens easiest when you have a clear picture of the future. There is a saying, we can send a man to the moon, but we can't solve poverty. Well, we know if a man is on the moon, we're clear. You're there or you're not there. But when you say solve poverty, do you mean for families? Do you mean for children? Do you mean in the U.S.? Do you mean globally? Do you mean, the current federal poverty line? Do you mean a living wage? What is it that you mean when you say that? And I think for us that are in the social sector, we each have our own picture of what success looks like for our organization or for the issue that we're working on. What Futurism does is allows you to develop a shared picture of that future. And what we have found is if you help groups look 30 to 50 years in the future, if you were 100% successful, if you met your mission, what do you look like externally? What's that impact? And then what would you look like internally for that to be true? When you do that, it doesn't take 30 to 50 years to get that success. It usually takes about 5 to 7. You just needed a long enough runway to, one, let go of ego about who gets credit and who has to do the work. And I don't have any space for new things. And it turns it into legacy and what's the world that I want to leave behind for my children and grandchildren. And I think from that space, you develop a beautiful picture of the future that you're willing to fight for every single day and that you want to jump out of the bed to create.
You're reminding me of a group I worked with years and years ago that actually one of our fellows at Creating the Future worked with. It has now been 15 years, and they credit all of their success to their vision statement.
I love it.
That is the thing that they hang everything on. We're so taught to focus on mission. Yeah. But what you're really talking about is the power of vision.
It is. Yeah. That point on the horizon that you're working towards. And I think that's the thing that lives in your gut. And that's the thing that if you make decisions just based on that, nobody comes to a nonprofit with like, please open a nuclear waste dump. It's all lovely things that are just misaligned with the sort of future that you want to create. But we say yes because they're lovely things. And so the energy isn't moving towards the specific future that we want. People are clear about that. You can say no to really fantastic things that just aren't aligned with where you're trying to go. And that's where there's some real power.
Even the words you're using, energy and power, there is energy and power in that vision. So what have you seen that brings people from where they are now to that vision? What makes that vision achievable?
I think a piece of it is that you have to create the space where people can radically imagine. I think the whole sector is in this fight or flight phase where we have been through a lot since 2020 and before. But really this constant grinding and pushing and feeling like issues that we're working on are getting worse faster than we're able to make them get better. It's a really frustrating place to be. And when you allow people to step back, in our visioning process, what we start with is not what have you done previously and let's check all the results and that sort of thing. We set all of that aside and say, let's dream together about what we'd like the future. If there was no barriers, if public policy was aligned, if money was not an issue, what would that future look like? And sometimes when you bring people together, you literally say, we're going to start this, but first, how about you look out the window for a couple of minutes and take a drink of water and stretch? Like, just be a human being in your body. If you're in person, go for a walk, come back. Let's jump into this because we're just running. And we need to get to the part of our brain where we really can dream and imagine. And when you do that, really powerful transformation happens.
What have you found that brings people to the space where they can imagine together? Because you're right, we do bring, my favorite pet peeve expression is to leave your baggage at the door. And your baggage is who you are. It's what's in my heart right now. Yeah. It's the pile of work on my desk or the fact that my kid just threw up. What have you found that brings people in, that allows them that space to go, okay, I can let go of that?
One of the things that we often do, it's also about trust of other people that are in the room. So if you're dreaming together, do you have the dream? We had that conflict about the annual report, and I don't know if I trust you, all of that stuff that comes along with being a part of the organization. And so if we've got a group of people together on Zoom, sometimes we start with a question that everybody's answering in the chat. When did you first become passionate about childhood health? Whatever your mission is of an organization, what's the thing that made that important to you? And people tell these beautiful stories. And when you start to look at that and you take a moment to tell your own story about why do I care about this? It's not a job. This is a calling, and this is a change that I want to create in the world. Oh, I remember I had that thing with my grandma, and she taught me how to grow vegetables. And I realized I felt so much better after I heard her vegetables than when I was eating a fast food hamburger. And I realized when I was little, that was something that was important. So you have this moment in yourself where you're grounded in the mission. And then you have a moment where you're noticing your peers and that they're also grounded in that mission. You go, I forgot that all of you care about this too. And I'm going to assume good intentions as we're dreaming about the future together. So it isn't about setting aside the baggage. It's really about being more transparent and bringing your full self into the process.
It's why the very first question I asked you when we got together here is, could you tell what led to your wanting to do the work that you're doing? I remember once asking this question, a very, very similar question, and it was with a bar association. So you picture, this was a statewide bar association, and it was their board. So you picture all of the sort of alpha attorneys that would gravitate to be on the board of a bar association. Yeah. And now all the alphas of them are on the statewide bar. And so when you're talking about building trust in a room, there's a lot of chest beating, there's a lot of positioning. And I asked a very similar question. What is it that led you to want to be an attorney?
That's great.
And it's easily 20 years since this happened, but it so sticks in my mind because it's just so beautiful. One of them finally said, well, it was either be a doctor or an attorney, and I couldn't do the math, so I became an attorney. And after everybody stopped laughing, 3 more people said, really? You too? That was me. And so in terms of immediately breaking down that we're the experts, we're so smart, I love the power of that question, but that one always sticks with me, is that moment of vulnerability.
Yes.
That trusting that one person will bring that moment of vulnerability that brings everybody together.
It makes such a big difference. And I think we forget that we're people first. And so we're doing this work. We're not making widgets. We're doing it because we have a story and a reason and a purpose. And if we're not harnessing that most important energy that exists in the sector, we're wasting it. So I think visioning and strategy is a really important time to make sure that we're anchoring people in the energy of that transformation, because that's how you move organizations forward.
And the whole concept that we have fought for the past easily 20, 30 years, that nonprofits should run more like a business. And that whole business-like ethos, what you're talking about goes directly counter to that.
Yeah. Do you mean we should run it like Apple or Enron or the corner store? I mean, there's lots of ways to run a business, and there's lots of ways to run a social sector organization. And I think there is a lot that the business sector is learning from nonprofits about how you bring purpose and how you bring mission forward and how that energizes and retains a workforce that wants to stick with you in the long term. I think that horse has been beaten for a long time, and I think we can let it go.
I think so, definitely. Most definitely. So once you've got people in the room who are building that trust, what have you seen that builds that pathway between where we are and that vision? Because so often people will say, well, it's all very nice to have that vision, but we have to get down to reality.
Yeah, for sure. We have a process where we use 2 curves, do my weird arm thing, but in the future is that ideal future. Here's what it looks like. And then you work back into the present and you say, what are we already doing, or what have we tried previously that would lead us directly to that future? And I think sometimes in sort of strategy and planning, it's like, here's the old thing and now there's a new thing, and the two don't cross. But really, it's about building on muscles that you already have. And so reminding people that actually you're well on the way. You did that thing. It went great. And look, if we keep doing that, we're going to get right there. So let's keep that going. And then I think the most powerful part in that process is, what are you doing right now that will never lead you to that ideal future? Mm-hmm. And what do you have to stop doing, and what do you have to let go of? And that's a real gift. It is a hard process, because sometimes it's culture and sometimes it's skill set of team members. And, there's a lot of different things that can be in that bucket. But sometimes it's the program that's been hanging around your neck for the last 10 years that nobody's happy with, but you felt like you had to continue to do it. Well, it's misaligned with the ideal future. So let's stop. Wow. Another organization can do it, or we can stop doing it overall. But it creates that space where suddenly you can do more of the things that are working and let go of what isn't.
Can you give an example of that? Can you tell us something that you've seen?
There was a program that we were working with that does after-school educational programs for kids. And when they looked at their ideal future, it's a fantastic organization. They've got these really amazing staff members that are digging into math and reading and making sure that kids get up to speed. And they were at a number of schools, but it's always like, can we do more? Can we do more? How many more schools? How many more kids can we reach? And when they stepped back into their ideal future, what they realized is they didn't want their program to exist. They wanted kids to not be doing enrichment activities after school. What they wanted them to be doing is hanging out with their friends and riding their bikes. That's the future that they were excited about. And serving more kids and serving more schools was never going to get them to that future. Now, of course, they're not there yet. And so you don't just stop doing what you're doing and say, kids, go play, because then, nobody can do math. So
Right.
what they decided to do is to invest a part of their organization's energy on teacher training to make sure that teachers had access to the cutting edge tools that they were using in their program, and then policy and advocacy work to make sure that schools were funded at the level that they were needed for kids to be successful. And those two activities are what are going to get them to the ideal future. In this transition time, they're going to continue to do their core program and move that forward. But I think every nonprofit goes, our goal is to be out of business. How? What does that future look like? What would it take to get there? It isn't sort of a thing on the side that you say. It should be the goal of all of our organizations to really meet those missions. So we need to know how to do that.
That path, I always envision it as a road.
Yes.
I'm here and here's where I want to go.
Yeah.
And if it's not on that road, we're not going to do it.
Yeah.
We're going to turn off because we know that's a detour.
Mm-hmm.
I've always found that very, very helpful to just look at things through that lens of, if it's not on that road, then obviously it's not where we're going.
It's not the right thing. I think the other analogy that's helped me a lot, especially we're living in a time of rapid transformation and change, and it's increasing exponentially. And so that pace is getting faster and faster. And I think we used to have a clear idea of here's what the next 3 years are going to look like, and we'll do a little bit more of this and a little bit of that. And
we can't tell what next Tuesday is going to look like.
100%. And so what we learned in 2020 and beyond is that there are rapid transformations that are happening, and our organizations need to be resilient enough. And I find that the combination of a long-term 30 to 50-year vision, as well as a rolling work plan. So I like a rolling 3-year work plan where you are every quarter looking back to see what you've accomplished and looking forward about what you're doing the next quarter. And then every quarter you're adding another quarter onto the end of the plan so that it serves you till the end of time. What that allows you to do is sort of like an airplane. When you're flying from New York to LA, what happens is you know where you're going in the general direction, and then the wind pushes you off track and you readjust and you readjust and you readjust. And in our organizations, we haven't had enough strategy to constantly readjust to those pressures. Sometimes you harness them. I've gotten in 45 minutes early for a flight because there was a wind behind us, and it got us where we were going a lot quicker than anybody expected. So if you can harness those wins, it helps you to get to that future faster. But I think for a lot of organizations, they said, well, we started and we were pointing north, so that's where I'm going to go. You may not end up where you intended if those future forces are pushing against you.
There's something powerful in having that vision be defined, knowing that's where you're heading. Yeah. And the beauty that I have found is that when you're, quote, re-upping your plan, when you're coming back together and it's been 2 years, it's been 3 years, you're not starting from scratch.
No.
Because you're already on the road. And that allows you to, as you're saying, okay, conditions have changed.
Yeah.
Here's where we're heading. Is the airplane going to head us to Mars right now?
Right,
or is it going to head us to Santa Monica?
Yeah. What's the direction we're going?
Right. I think that's really important. I've always been struck when a group is looking at their next planning session, their next retreat, and starting all over again.
Doesn't make any sense.
This is what we do. This is what, in many cases, this is what we're taught. Okay, well, start at the beginning, do your analysis, do whatever that we are taught to do in strategic planning, rather than you're on a road already.
Yeah. I think the other part that I've been on the soapbox about strategic planning for the last couple of years, my team is like, we get it. But I think that the challenge of strategic planning is this idea of every 3 to 5 years, an outside consultant and expert comes in and they bring strategy to you and they help you lay out the path And it's a little bit of hubris to say, I know exactly what the next 5 years are going to look like. No, you don't. You've no idea what the next 5 years are going to bring to you. I'm a futurist. I don't know what the next 5 years are going to bring to you. I think we need to build that capacity internally in organizations. We need to build that bench strength so that we can always be strategic, so that when somebody calls and says, hey, do you want to partner on this program? How is that aligned with the strategy? How is that aligned with our values? How is that aligned with our mission? And anybody from the receptionist to the CEO to a board member that's getting propositioned at a cocktail party can say, actually, that's fantastic, but that's misaligned with where we're going. Or that is amazing. We would love to talk to you right away about that partnership. But if everybody has a different operating framework that they're using, what you have is these Franken nonprofits where it's a little bit of this and a funder asked us to do this and the donor said this and the ED likes this and our program director is really good at this thing. And so now we're doing this. None of it together makes any sense. And I think all of this work is about how do we align? That's how you get to success. That's how you get to transformation.
Well, and so much of that is driven by money. The false scarcity, and I really do believe it's false, that we live in the nonprofit sector because our work is dependent on resourcing from outside. So much of that is we chase the dollars because that will lead us to surviving. And then we're chastised for, quote, chasing the dollars, the words that I just used, when in fact, what else are we going to do to survive? And just creating that ethos where we're constantly on that hamster wheel. Yeah. What have you seen in terms of people getting off of that so that they can comfortably say, no, we're not going to go after that, even though, yes, we understand there's $100,000 if we do, and we're not going to do it.
Yeah. I think first a cautionary tale. So I started my career in fundraising, and I worked for Girl Scouts, and they've got camps and amazing programming. And we had a board member that worked for an electric company. They had a series of environmental grants that they were giving away, and she really wanted to make sure that we got a grant. And so she sat down with her CEO, and then I'm in the meeting taking notes. She said, here's what you need to do. I'm going to make sure it gets funded, but it's got to fit these guidelines and do these things. And great. And then we're sitting with the program team, and they're like, we don't have anything that fits with that. And we're like, we got to figure it out. They're like, Trista, figure it out. You're writing the grant. You figure out what we're doing on the program. So I'm talking to the funder, and she goes, I've heard we're really excited about composting. And I think if girls learned about that, that would be really helpful. Okay, well, I don't know how we're going to do that at camp. What we came up with was worm buckets. The girls at camp created a composting bucket to bring home from camp that was filled with garbage and worms. And then they got to bring it home, and it could eat their trash. And who was happy about this? Nobody. The girls hated it. The parents were ticked, and the program directors hated it. We had a summer full of angry calls from parents, from troop leaders. Girls were like, this is the grossest thing you've ever done. A parent is like, it's spilled in the trunk on the way back from camp, and I've been pulling these worms out. And that was like a $10,000 grant. And we probably spent $20,000 in staff time cleaning up. And
literally cleaning up.
And the next year, fielding questions like, no, we will not have worm buckets again. I know you're trying to make this decision about investing in camp. There will not be worms. And that waste of time and energy so that we could check off that we had raised these dollars was definitely not worth it. What I find, we work with a lot of foundations, and what we hear from the foundations is people come to us with, here are all the things that are broken. Please give us dollars. It's more broken than somebody else that applied. Rarely funders get an application where somebody says this investment will create this transformation in the world. This is the future that we're trying to create. And if you make this investment, here's where we're going to go. And if you make a bigger investment, we're going to get there faster. Funders are hungry for that. And so for nonprofits, and I always tell foundations, you are the chief problem lovers in the field. We talk about how do you stop loving the problem. They love problems. Tell me how broken it is. Give me the percentages. Why you instead of somebody else? But for nonprofits, tell them the story of what's being built. And foundations are learning how to ask. They're learning how to create spaces where grantees can radically imagine, but they're not all there yet. So you have to show them the way by creating a picture of what the future could look like.
We've been encouraging foundations to change the questions on their grant applications. Instead
100%.
of what is the problem and how will you solve it?
Yeah.
What is the future you're looking to create? Our name is Creating the Future.
Yeah.
What is the future you're looking to create, and what steps are you going to take to create that? We had an interesting thing. There's a crowdfunding platform in Australia called Start Some Good that Tom Dawkins founded. Tom was one of our fellows very, very early on in Creating the Future, and immediately went back. This is 10, 12 years ago, immediately went back and they changed their grant application. Not grant application, but the things you fill out to do the crowdfunding. Yeah. And it asked specifically, what is the future that you're looking to create and what will it take to create that? They found two things. One, we were talking before about the energy. They said that the energy in the videos, because, you do crowdfunding, you do a video.
Yeah, you do video.
The energy in the videos was so different when they were talking about the future they wanted to create. And they raised more money.
Yeah.
And so, getting to your point, foundations can simply change the question that they're asking, that one question.
Yeah.
It changes everything.
It creates new space to imagine. And I think we've gotten really stuck in this place. Like if somebody came to me and said, the pandemic happened and lifespans are shorter and racial disparities are this big and blah, blah, blah. What are you doing this quarter to fix this? I would once again get in the fetal position underneath my desk. But if somebody said, what is the world that you want to leave behind for your great-grandchildren? I got a lot of ideas and I've got a lot of pictures of what I want that future to look like. And I'm going to jump right into it because I want to make it happen. And I think we've gotten in this habit of loving the problem and getting stuck in this place of talking about what's broken, and we got to get out of it.
One of the things that's fun to watch in a room full of people who may have very different missions is that we pretty much all share the same vision.
For sure.
And what we found is that creates opportunities for allies that you never really thought about. I'm struck by your wonderful story about the worm buckets. Clearly, the people who would be affected by that were never included in the decision. And absolutely. I'm wondering what you've seen in terms of including people in those conversations so that you're not sending worm buckets home.
My favorite example of this, we worked with a neighborhood called Camden Town, which is in North Minneapolis, and it's a predominantly African-American community, and they asked us to come out during National Night Out. And it's this big community celebration, and we created this sort of an art exhibit, which is this huge chalkboard with all of these colored chalk markers. And we asked people to draw what the future of Camden Town looked like and write down their ideas. And people wanted a restaurant in the neighborhood where you could grab a hamburger and a beer. The little kids wanted an ice cream shop and a better playground. People wanted space that you could just be a person. What does that third space look and feel like in this neighborhood? And the interesting part, as they're sort of drawing these pictures of the future, is one, it gave the elected officials that were there that were making decisions about long-term investments in the neighborhood a picture. Should invest in this and not in this. The foundations that were in that space, it helped them better understand what does the 8-year-old in the neighborhood want. I know I'm hearing from the after school program that's working with them, but here's what the kids are asking for. They say this road needs a bike lane because this is how they get from school to the park. That's the thing. And what we saw in the couple of years after that was millions of dollars of reinvestment in this couple block area that really have transformed what it looks like and has made that future vision a reality. And so what I find when you talk to community members, there's two things that happen. One, they are the clearest source of information about what that future looks like because they're running into those broken spots and they're running into the things that work really well, and they'll tell you all about it. The other thing that we saw with the project, we were helping the state of California re-envision the Medicare program. And we talked to hundreds of Californians that were on Medicare about what they wanted the program to look like in the future. And they had these beautiful visions of what it looked like. But what we heard from so many of those participants is, one, I'm so honored that you would ask me about what I think about this multi-billion-dollar program. And two, if I can envision the future of Medicare, what does the future of my own employment look like? What does the future of my family's housing situation look like? What does the future of my neighborhood look like? I can have pictures of that as well. And so using your imagination and that future muscle many of us haven't done it since we were a kid. And so when you create the space where people can practice and stretch that, the ripple effects are endless.
And it goes directly counter to what we, again, are taught, classic strategic planning. Yeah. Go out and ask people what the problems are. Do surveys about what the problems are. We need to do a needs assessment. And people are very, very used to telling us what the problems are in their neighborhood, and there's nothing energizing about that.
Yeah. When we do visioning, what we say is, when you tell us the future state, you can't tell us what it is not. So you can't say your organization is no longer racist. I don't want to hear that. What does it look like if it really worked the way that you wanted it to? And it takes longer, and you got to sort of push through and really stretch yourself to do it. But I can't build something based on what you don't want to have happen. And so tell me what you want, and then we can build a path to get there.
Strength builds on strength. It's just amazing how we have no muscles for the visioning. How so frequently when we're facilitating in demonstration projects, because Creating the Future does a lot of demonstration projects, you run up against folks who you'll ask that aspirational question and the room is quiet. And then the room is quiet. And what we'll eventually do is, okay, we'll give you a couple minutes. Tell us what's wrong. And immediately we'll reframe that to, okay, if no one is trusting, then what you're saying good would look like is there's trust in our community. And just that ability to translate to, okay, we get what bad looks like. And that's, we are so programmed and so conditioned to talk about what's wrong that I agree with you. It takes longer to sort of pull it out of people to say, okay, what would good look like? And the number of times, and I'm sure you've encountered this, that people say, nobody's ever asked me that.
Of course. I think within our organizations and for your listeners, start asking these questions in every staff meeting. I used to always have these, goofy questions of what's a thing that you wish was invented? You thought it would be invented by now, but isn't. It's a flying car, the hoverboard, or whatever. And in my previous organization, we always did these questions. And I asked that one, and everybody answered except for our public policy director. And he said, pass. I said, okay, so go to the next one. And then we get towards the end. I said, hey, you want to go? No. Okay, you're normally down for these dumb questions. What's going on? So after the meeting, I said, what was that about? And he said, you asked the question, and I realized I hadn't imagined something that didn't exist since I was a kid, and it made me so sad. He was our public policy guy, so he had to be on top of what are the threats and what's happening. He hadn't used that muscle, and it really made him sad. And I think within our organizations, what are the little opportunities that we can practice? What do you think a classroom's going to look like 30 years in the future? Your highest hopes. What could it look like? What's the future of democracy look like? If it worked exactly how you wanted it to, what does that picture look like? What would it look like if everybody in our community had access to food? How would that frame, work? What if we didn't have prisons? What would the future of that look like? How would we structure society? And just leaving those little seeds of conversation, you're building a muscle. And then when you say, what does the future of our organization look like? If we were fully successful, or at the end of your career, what would people say at your retirement party about the transformation and change that you've made? People have then built the ability to be able to do that.
That is perfect. I absolutely love that. It's really talking about the fact that this is a practice. Mm-hmm. That when we're stepping into something that we have traditionally been conditioned not to do, and we're so often told not to do it. Okay, that's a nice dream, but we got to pay the mortgage. We got to pay the rent this. We got to make payroll this month. Just like any other muscle. I'm not going to go out tomorrow and run a marathon. I had better walk around the block a couple times first. But I got to walk around the block every day. And then go to 2, and then go to 3 blocks, and then go to a mile. And what you're really talking about is, what does it take to build that muscle of imagination? When you broke my heart when you talked about the gentleman who had not imagined since he was a child.
Yeah.
We're told to grow up. I mean, that's what we're, grow up, get real.
Get your head out of the clouds. Sometimes people call futurists cloud shovelers. So, there's this sort of frame of, keep it together. As you were talking about this muscle piece, there's a discomfort part. And I have a theme for myself this year of chasing that feeling of discomfort, because that's where growth happens. I hate it when it's happening. I love to be smart and understand what's going on. But I often find myself in situations where I'm like, oh, this feels difficult? How come I don't know my way forward? And we have something called FutureGood Studio where we teach people futurism. And right in the middle is this place of discomfort where it's gotten to the part where people are actually practicing using the tools. And because it's new, it feels uncomfortable. And that's when people say, I think the program's broken. It doesn't work. I don't like it. And I'm like, that is the feeling that you're chasing. And so we created some materials to help people understand that feeling was coming. And I was helping my team develop it. But at the same time, we were working on this big project about Medicare, which was a growth area for us, talking to hundreds of people in-person meetings all across the state of California is a huge logistical challenge. There's cultural competency issues as we're dealing with all these different communities, and it was really hard. And so I was feeling that same feeling of discomfort, and I was talking to my team, and I said, maybe we shouldn't be doing this sort of outreach. Maybe we need to better stick at the organizational level and that sort of thing. And one of my team members said, do you think maybe this is this feeling of discomfort that you were just talking to everybody else about? I don't like it for me. I get it. And so if you know that is that muscle strengthening, just like you work out at a gym and it hurts the next day, there is a part in this process that feels unsteady and feels hard, and it feels like maybe I'm not on the right path. But if you keep on doing it, you get more stable, and then you're ready for the next growth edge and the next growth edge.
Yeah. You're making me think about like taking a Zumba class for the first time.
Yeah.
And
oh my goodness.
Okay, they look great and I look like an idiot. I'll never get it. How did you move your leg? I don't understand how to move my leg like that. And everything feels clunky when it's new. And eventually, suddenly, you're the one that the new person is looking at and going, I want to be like her. Exactly. And you're like, oh, you should have seen me when we started.
Yeah. All of it is growth. And I think for folks that are mid-career and leading organizations and that sort of thing, you are used to not being in that learning edge, but the world is transforming and changing so fast that we always have to be growing and we always have to be learning. There's no done with that anymore. And so how do we lean into that feeling to help our organizations become more resilient?
I've also noticed that, and it's funny, we were teaching this, again, decades ago. We were teaching some of this stuff and what does it take to imagine the future and see it as an achievable goal and walk towards it as an achievable goal. And we got to, it was a 5-day program, and we got to day 3 and the group unraveled. And we all went to dinner afterwards, and someone took me aside who was also a consultant, and he said, it's the middle of the week. And I said, yeah. He said, that's the point of transition. That's the point where it moves from theory to practice. Mm-hmm. So in the first couple of days, I get it cognitively. I understand this vision thing that Trista's talking about. We have to aim at what we're looking at. And this all makes such good sense in here. And then Monday and Tuesday, that's where I learned that. And Wednesday morning, I woke up and went, oh, crap. That's me, and I don't know how, and it was such a brilliant observation that I've carried with me for all of these decades now, that it is at that transition point when we're starting to rub up against that change, just like you're talking about, that suddenly it's no longer just what I understand cognitively. It's like, okay, I'm feeling something shift inside. And that feels clunky, and I'm not used to clunky, and I would much rather know where I'm going. And the huge power in coming out the other side of that, though.
Yeah, it's a people piece. I mean, any sort of transition, what I appreciate about anchoring in a future vision is that then the future becomes more comfortable than the present, because you are so bought into what you want it to look like. You're willing to do the hard transformation and work that's necessary to get there, because everything that you're doing in the present that's misaligned with that future, you can feel it every time you bump into it. And normally in strategy, what happens is when you're anchoring in the past accomplishments, it's the devil that you know. And so people don't know what that point around the corner is. And they say, yeah, we should get that new database, or let's do this new program. I don't know. What would it look like at the end? I don't want to. And people fight it every step along the way. But in this process, people are really quick to let go of the old because they already have seen the promise of the new.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. I have one last question for you. What are you excited about these days?
Yeah.
What in your life are you excited about?
Yeah, I've been practicing cultivating boredom. So there is a thing that happens when your brain is bored where disparate ideas start to come together and you create meaning. And that's why we have shower ideas. And, when you're on vacation, suddenly you're so brilliant and you're flying on all cylinders. And I have realized that you have to cultivate that. We have these, devices that constantly entertain us. And it used to be that you stood in line at the bank and you were bored and you came up with a good idea. Now we're not. We're scrolling on social media and we're reading emails and we're doing all the things. We don't have those moments of clarity anymore. And so for me, it's setting times where the phone is put away and I'm not connected to it and I go for a walk without technology. Or I just got back 2 days ago from a 3-week writing sabbatical where I had no meetings and I was just working on one thing and spending a lot of time in nature and really kind of imagining what that looks like. And the payoff of that is fantastic. It's personally fantastic. And when we're living in a world where there's constantly all of these inputs, it really makes a big difference when you purposefully set those things aside. So when we do futures work, it can be really overwhelming for people to, could it look like and I have to build it and how's it going to work? Yes. And take a walk and breathe and meditate and be a human being and step away from all of that so that when you jump back into it, you're a lot smarter about what's coming.
This has been wonderful, Trista. I know our listeners are just going to get a ton out of it, and I so appreciate your time, and hopefully we will do this again soon. So thank you so much.
I appreciate the invitation and all the fantastic work that you're doing to build a better future.
Thanks. I'm so grateful to Trista for sharing her thoughts with us. There is absolutely a path to the future we want to see for our world. And as Trista shared, it all starts with our having a clear picture of the future we want to create. That means that we stop focusing so much on what we do not want, the end of this or that, poverty, homelessness, substance abuse, war. It requires that we instead focus laser sharp on what we do want, asking what good would look like. In the social change arena, we are so focused on what's wrong, what is not working. But real change happens when we can clearly envision what we do want, because we can't reach for something we can't see. Imagine having as clear a picture of health as we do of sickness, as clear a picture of equity as we have a picture of homelessness and injustice and racism. And that all starts with the questions we're asking ourselves. When we flip from asking, what is the problem? And instead ask, what do we aspire to? What would good look like? That change seems small, but once you try it, you'll see what a huge difference that one question can make. If you'd like more information about Trista's work or more information about the work we're doing at Creating the Future, you'll find that all in the notes on the podcast page. And of course, if this episode got you thinking, we hope you'll subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for being with us today and for wanting to create a better future for our world. We'll see you next time here at Creating the Future.